Wow. Oh. Oh. Flippin' hurts. Reading is hard work, apparently. Dang. Whew. For a while now, I've been writing a script for a video that I'm working on about 2 books that I recently read. The first one being Kitchen Confidential: Adventures in the Culinary Underbelly. The second one being Medium Raw: A Bloody Valentine to the World of Food and the People Who Cook, both of which were written by Anthony Bourdain. Now, in the process of working on this script, I came across 2 fairly lengthy passages, one in each book, that were related to each other, that I really wanted to share with you, but I didn't really want a huge chunk of time devoted to just me reading to you in the middle of this video. So what I thought I'd do is I would record a separate companion video for that one before it's released, where I just read those 2 passages, so that if you have no interest in just sitting there and watching me read for a little while, you could skip this video and just watch the other video when it's released. So the topic is the absurd lives of the ultra-rich. And the first anecdote that Anthony Bourdain tells is from Kitchen Confidential, which he wrote when he was basically a struggling chef, spending every penny he earned on drugs, and just basically struggling to get by in life. And so it was written from the view of a fairly poor person looking into the lives of the rich. And then the second story was written after he achieved fame and money, and now he was a millionaire. He was amongst that lifestyle, but still writing about kind of another tier of ultra rich people that was even sort of above his financial level, perhaps. As I read these, I am going to censor out certain words just for the sake of keeping my own channel family friendly here. And what I'm going to leave in, even though they kind of bother me a lot, are the fact that Anthony Bourdain and the other kitchen staff kind of mock people based upon their age, their level of infirmity, and their physical appearance, which are things that I really dislike. But if we can get past those things, I think he has some really interesting things to say about this world of the 1%. So I'm going to settle in and get comfy and read you some stories. The shorter anecdote here comes from the chapter called I Make My Bones in Kitchen Confidential, and he starts off with, I landed a job almost right away at the venerable New York institution, the Rainbow Room, high atop Rockefeller Center. It was my first experience of the real big time, one of the biggest, busiest, and best-known restaurants in the country. I was willing to do anything to prove myself, and when I got in that elevator on the 64th floor kitchen for the first time, I felt as if I was blasting off to the moon. So skipping ahead a few pages now. My job at the Rainbow Room initially was to prepare and serve a lunch buffet for about 100 or so regular members of the Rockefeller Center Luncheon Club, mostly geriatric business types from the building who assembled in the Rainbow Grill every day. I had to prepare a cold buffet and 2 hot entrees, which I'd then serve and maintain from noon to 3. This was no easy feat, as the buffet was comprised solely of leftovers from the previous night's service. I'd begin each morning at 7:30 pushing a little cart with wobbly casters down the line, where the cooks would hurl hunks of roast pork, end cuts, crocks of cooked beans, overcooked pasta, blanched vegetables, and remnants of sauces at me. My job was to find a way to make all this look edible. I have to say, I did pretty well, using every dirty trick I'd learned at CIA, the Culinary Institute of America, I think that is. I turned leftover steaks into, say, salade de boeuf en vinaigrette, transformed dead pasta and veggies into festive pasta salads, made elaborately aspiced and decorated trays out of sliced leftover roast. I made mousses, pâtés, galantines, and every other thing I could think of to turn the scrapings into something our aged but wealthy clientele would gum down without complaint. And then, of course, I'd don a clean jacket and apron, cram one of those silly coffee filter-like chef's hats on my head, and stand by a voiture slicing and serving the hot entrees. "Would you care for some tongue en madère?" I'd ask through clenched teeth, my face a rictus of faux cheer, as I'd have to repeat and repeat for the hard of hearing captains of industry who ate the same spread of sauce-disguised leftovers every lunch, and for whom the hot entree was clearly the highlight of their day. "Boiled beef with horseradish sauce, sir," I'd chirp. "And would you care for a steamed potato with that?" The Irish waitresses who worked the luncheon club with me were more like nurses after years of this. They had nicknames for our regulars. Dribbling Dick for one 90-year-old who had a hard time keeping his food in his mouth, Stinky for an apparently incontinent banker, Shaky Pete for the guy who needed his food cut for him, and so on. There were famous names in banking and industry with us every day, all New York laid out below us, beyond the floor-to-ceiling picture windows, eating garbage at the top of the world. Now, when Anthony himself achieved fame and fortune, he was able to get a more intimate view into this phenomenon, and he was able to explain it still further in Medium Raw in Chapter 3, called "The Rich Eat Differently Than You and Me." He was describing a brief romantic relationship he had with one of these ultra-rich ladies and how they had taken a vacation together to the Caribbean and were on the island of St. Bart's. Here's what Anthony has to say about that. "One man on the island understood better than anyone the world my companion moved in. An artist, a genius, a man who stood alone in his ability, the sheer relish with which he effed the rich. Let's call him, for the purposes of this discussion, Robert, the man who took what might be described as the Cipriani business model to its most extreme yet logical extension, and a man whose example gave me, in some ways, the strength to endure. The Ciprianis, along with a few other operators and imitators, made, a long while back, a remarkable discovery, that rich international F-tards like to hang out with each other and eat marginally decent Italian food, and are willing to pay outrageous amounts of money for the privilege. Better yet, all the people who want to look like they, too, are rich international F-tards will want to get in on the action as well. That's the customer base that dreams are made of. If you go to Harry's Bar in Venice, you'll get a pretty good plate of food, and the Bellinis are just fine. They just cost a F of a lot. But they do treat you courteously, and it is Venice out the window, and everything's expensive anyway. I'm guessing the Ciprianis figured out that if this model worked in Venice, it would work in New York. That maybe $29 for a bowl of spaghetti with red sauce is perfectly reasonable. In New York, it is a cruel irony of Italian food that the more ingredients in your spaghetti with red sauce, the more time and steps spent preparing it, the more it costs to prepare, the less likely it is to be good. It will also usually be cheaper on the menu. Consider, though, a basic, authentic, just like Italy, spaghetti al pomodoro, a few ounces of good quality dry-cut pasta, a few drops of olive oil, garlic, some tomato, and a basil leaf. This will cost you $29, and the drink that precedes it will cost at least $17. Essentially, you're paying extra for someone to not F up your food. Many who gaze admiringly at the Ciprianis took things a little further, realizing that decent food was in no way necessary. Rich international douchebags and those who love them will happily pay those kinds of prices simply to be jammed into tiny dollhouse-sized banquets, cheek by Botox jowl at Nello, or to poke at faux Chinese food in graveyards of the uber-rich like Mr. Chow and Philippe. Add to the mix some curiously available Eastern European women who find low-riding ballsacks distinctly fascinating, you've got yourself a recipe for success. But Robert on St. Bart's? He had it all figured out. He took the model where it should have been all along, cut things right to their very core nubbin of ugliness. You don't have to have decent food. On the contrary, you can explicitly and with great care and determination, he discovered, serve crap. You don't need a nice room, fancy tablecloths, flowers, or even Russian sex workers. You need only a nice location, in this case a wood-planked beachfront patio deck, and an attitude. Specifically, you need a reputation as an ornery F who doesn't give a crap about anything or anybody. Then, like Robert, you can not only F the rich, you can F each and every one of them personally, one at a time. Just bend them over a sawhorse in order and Roger them up the poop chute while they thank you repeatedly. At his restaurant for 25 euros, about 35 US then, one gets a few grams of cold, unseasoned, boiled lentils on a very large plate. Lentils. That's it. About 2 tablespoons of them, with not so much as a carrot chunk or limp dice of onion to distinguish them from what some street kid with a skateboard and a hacky sack is eating right now in a parking lot in Portland. Probable food cost to Robert? Maybe 2 cents. Feel free to season with oil and vinegar though, provided complimentary. For the main course, there is the option of chicken or fish. Chicken is 1 leg, which Robert himself, that's him, the scowling, shirtless, and unshaven fellow over there, wearing an apron, shorts, and flip-flops, will personally burn into unrecognizability for you. Nothing less than carbonized will satisfy his exacting standards. Robert will take the extra step to ruin your chicken each and every time. People who've had the temerity to step over to the grill preemptively and suggest that, perhaps, this order could be a little less cooked find themselves quickly in the street, next to Madonna. The fish option is a small, barely cleaned, whole red snapper prepared with similar attention to detail, which is to say, burned to crap. Price for these delights of land and sea? 50 euros, about 75 bucks each. Add a chilled bottle of the cheapest rosé on the list to stave off the summer's heat and ameliorate perhaps the taste of campfire in your mouth, and you're talking $500 for lunch. Merci, and F you very much. And yet they line up, they beg, they try and bribe, they conspire, they whisper loudly into their cell phones to friends in Saint-Tropez or Puente del Este or Rome, trying to reach someone with influence over the situation so that they may visibly swan past less favored mortals and sit triumphant on the patio of the gods. If, as the man says, behind every great fortune there is a crime, then surely many of these customers have sanctioned every variety of cold-blooded behavior in the interests of a few dollars here and there, relocating African villages, flooding valleys, gouging the infirm, dumping toxins down wells, and knocking off the inconvenient when circumstances require. But for Robert, they cheerfully grab their ankles, and they don't even ask for a reach-around. It begs the question, why? It's a question I've been wrestling with since early in my career, when I was charged with the care and refilling of the trays and hotel pans at the Rockefeller Center Luncheon Club, where the masters of the financial universe ate every daytime meal at our sorry-ass buffet of the damned. I wondered what might have compelled these people, who single-handedly decided the fate of nations, the captains of industry, the fabulously wealthy wives of potentates, scions of old European families who didn't even remember where their money came from. Why would these people cower in the dreary confines of the lunch club, or fight tooth and nail clawing over the bodies of their friends to eat truly awful, insultingly priced food on a shabby pool deck, abused by a man of no standing or station, whom under ordinary circumstances they would have set the hounds on without a second thought? Why, for that matter, tolerate the absurd pretense and prices of Mr. Chow or Philippe or Nello or Cipriani when there are 100 better restaurants within a few moments' drive? What my horrible week on St. Bart's taught me was that this traveling strata of mega-rich people, all of whom know each other, crave nothing more than the comfort, the assurance that they're going to the same crummy place as everybody else. Perhaps this explains why they all go to the same lousy beaches, usually narrow, pebbly, and unimpressive stretches of oft-reeking sand that would be unacceptable to any half-seasoned backpacker, and to restaurants that any food nerd with a website and a few bucks would walk sneeringly by. Try arguing the virtues of Nello on chowhound.com, or a similar online meeting ground for knowledgeable food nerds, and prepare to get pilloried. So, why would people who can afford to eat anywhere obligingly allow themselves to be charged outrageous amounts of money for food that is, on its very best day, mediocre? A clue came to me on St. Bart's as I lay on a chaise lounge, half drunk in the moonlight, various Gaddafis and their guests frolicking in the background. Perhaps it's that they're so ugly, these beautiful people. They wear the same ugly clothes, designed by the same misogynistic old queens, who must privately piss themselves with laughter seeing their older, richer clientele squeezing into these outfits, leading one to the observation that the style makers themselves, the people who decide what the world will wear next year, who is pretty, what's hot and what's not, are uniformly hideous beyond the lurid imaginings of club scouts around a campfire. Just look at the guest judges on Project Runway or America's Next Top Model, or at the front row of any fashion show, and you'll get the idea. A dumpier, less attractive, more badly dressed bunch of customers would be hard to find outside a suburban dress barn. Rick James in the 70s could never have gotten away with what Karl Lagerfeld wears every day. He'd have been hooted off the stage. If Donatella Versace showed up at your door selling Amway products, you'd slam it and double lock it before calling the neighbors to warn them. As I looked around the beach, I saw, in the jaundiced light of my unhappiness, the full extent of the horror of this island of Dr. Moreau I'd willingly marooned myself on. The full spectrum of plastic surgeries gone wrong, right there in the open, curiosities of the flesh, which, at a lesser income level, would have been confined to the carnival sideshow. Mouths that pulled to the side, lips plumped beyond credibility, cheeks filled with golf ball-like lumps, and foreheads frozen so tight you could play snare drums on them. Identical noses, eyes that refused to blink and could barely even close. And there was my date for the night in her $1,000 plain white t-shirt, searching, once again, for her cell phone. It makes sense that restaurant operators and Robert would prey on these people. They should. They are, after all, in the business of desire, of figuring out what fulfills their clients' wants and needs. What they want on St. Bart's, as elsewhere I'm guessing, is to feel secure among others of their ilk. Secure that they've chosen the right place, the place everybody else in their set will choose. Secure that, if nothing else, everyone else in attendance will have bought into the shared illusion, where no one will point out the obvious, that they're too old and too ugly to be wearing what they're wearing, that the surgery didn't help, that they can't, and shouldn't in fact, dance ever again. I don't like that part at all. That they're eating food that the cleanup guy, who's going to sweep up after closing, wouldn't touch with rubber gloves and andirons. That the rest of the people on this planet, if enough of them knew who they really were and how they had made their money, would have their heads quickly on pikes. So there you have it, some rather interesting observations to carry you over until I actually get the video on the full scope of both of these books done. What do you think about all that? Do let me know. Oh my gosh, I am so glad somebody took the time to watch this video. If you could just do me one more favor and consider giving me a thumb up, maybe subscribe to my channel, or share the link to this video with somebody who you think would enjoy it, I would really appreciate that. Cheers. Sure. Don't like this setup. What I'm going to leave in, even though they kind of bother me a lot, are in both of these passages, Anthony Bourdain and the fellow staff members in the kitchens. A man who stood alone in his ability. Ow. Or to poke at faux Chinese food in graveyards of the fiber. Oh my gosh. On the contrary, you can have everyone else in attendance will have brought into the shared. Feel free to. God, my thumb is cramping. What the heck? Ow. Ow. What the heck? Ow. Oh. Oh. Flippin' hurts. Reading is hard work, apparently. Dang. Whew. Holy cow. Add to the mix some curiously available Eastern European women who find low-riding ball